you see my presentation? Great. Thank you. So, African Pharmaceutical Network is basically a platform that was established in 2020. And the reason of why we came up with African Pharmaceutical Network, that was actually on the backdrop of COVID-19. And some of the realizations and what we realized at that point was that as much as the pandemic was there, COVID-19 was in place, and most of the havoc that it was causing to the world was also being experienced in Africa. There was need for a continental front, a continental engagement, a platform that could bring the technical experts and industry leaders from the African landscape who would be able to shape the future in terms of delivering intervention, also driving those investment and priorities for ensuring that in the event that we ever get to have another pandemic and another disease outbreak, the pharmaceutical system within the continent would be robust enough, able to respond to those needs at any one point that they needed to be. And our African people and ourselves as Africans within the continent would be able to be guaranteed reliable access to safe, effective, and quality medicines. So guided by that, then we came up with a platform, and that became African Pharmaceutical Network. And our principle and our ways of working is to focus on knowledge sharing, because we understand that for us to be able to deliver on our aspirations, we need a competent professionals who are actually trained, equipped, and skilled to be able to deliver health interventions and solutions wherever they're practicing within the pharmaceutical value chain, from research and development to the last mile care delivery and the bedside, the hospital setting. That is an important thing. But at the same time, for that to work, we need an enabling policy environment and enterprising ecosystem that would ensure that people are working within the spaces there. The value of their work is appreciated, but at the same time, the policies are rather not killing or actually thriving, and the policies are rather not limiting the ability to innovate, but rather supporting them to be able to innovate and drive that position, that possibility. So the policy environment is a critical component. Then finally, all these that works within our ability to work in organizations and institutions, which means there is need for us to structure innovative partnerships that will support an enabling business ecosystem, stimulating investment and financing and all the resources that we need to be able to unlock those possibilities are critical. So what is the current landscape and what is the background of where we are starting from? We have limited local manufacturing in Africa, and there's already a lot of work that has been happening on that front from a point of a pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa in 2005. Business plan was developed. There are different interventions, and currently we have conversations about establishing African Medicine Agency, the African Medical Pharmaceutical Foundation platform, partnership, and all that. These kind of interventions are coming in. What are we doing to ensure that it is of value to us? But at the same time, we have segregated continental industry where people within the RF space would be operating in that space, the pharmacovigilance from the pharma industry on their own. The government stakeholders, the regulatory agencies are also working in silos wherever they are. How do we create a synergistic outlook where we are able to come together and engage to ensure that we're shaping the industry that we hope for? Finally, we needed a platform. The platform that we saw that would come in handy was African Pharmaceutical Network, being driven by the professionals, by the industry players, so that we can have a sustainable future working together to shape the industry for what we want it to do. In terms of interventions and moving to the priorities, pharmaceutical workforce development, there's never going to be success unless we have the professionals who are competent and qualified to deliver the work. The business ecosystem support, the business environment needs to be robust, financing needs to be there. We need to have the technical resourcing, we need to have the linkages and the partnerships that will enable us to harness the power that is within the ecosystem. Finally, we need an enabling policy environment, and that is key. How we do this, we have industry discussion forum. This is one of them. We have trainings and experiential learning opportunities, and there are a couple of courses that we'll be having. And at the end of this session, we'll share more about some of the programs that we currently have and some that we're actually hoping to bring on board in the coming features. Then we have the policy advocacy component and environment shaping and market intelligence and technical support to stakeholders as much as we go that journey. In terms of the team that is behind the work we're doing, we have an advisory board of 3. There's the McDonald Wilson, who is a board member, Captain Asai, and John Paulo Molog. Then this is the technical team that we're working with within the operational structure. Myself, my colleague, Dr. Odong Kelvin, Dr. Nyongo Esther, and Noshri Patel, and Ms. Juliet Ouma, who is the leader of our programs, who actually coordinates most of the engagements. With that, I'll stop at this point and bring it back to Kennedy, who will be taking us into the session just to share with us what he had prepared for us for the day. Then we get into the discussions and see where is pharmacovigilance going? What are the opportunities for us? How do we unlock those possibilities and ensure that as professionals in the industry, we're able to ensure that we safeguard the health and the safety of the people in the continent who are counting on us to support their wellness journey. On that note, I'll welcome you, Kennedy, to take over from me at this point.
Thank you, David. Just confirm one, you can see my screen, you can see me and you can hear me. Then we can get started.
Fantastically well, yes.
Perfect. Thank you, David, for the invitation. I need to first declare that David and I have known each other for quite some time. So thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor to present to the APN network about my interest in PV. And so the team at African Pharmaceutical Network asked me to speak about the trends, opportunities, and essentials of pharmacovigilance in Africa. I was given the liberty to really decide what to talk about. And so I hope in the next 30 or 40 minutes, I can keep you interested and spark your interest in pharmacovigilance. So this is me. So as David mentioned, I'm based in Uganda and I'm a pharmacist. So I've done PV work for the last 5 years. So essentially what I do is help marketing authorization holders comply to good pharmacovigilance practices. Many of you may be familiar with the GXPs. So maybe good manufacturing practices, good distribution practices, good pharmacy practices, but also have good pharmacovigilance practices. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. There's also a component of good clinical practices, as we'll later learn. Pharmacovigilance is also done during pre-approval phase, that is during clinical trials. I also support marketing authorization holders in doing regulatory intelligence, mostly around pharmacovigilance in a number of countries in East Africa. So regulatory intelligence is very important to ensure that the industry is up to date or kept abreast of the ever-changing regulatory requirements within the region and the continent at large. I also do what we call QPPV, that's a qualified person for pharmacovigilance. This is a position mandated by regulators across many parts of Africa. We'll later learn what a QPV does, but essentially I'm the main contact person between the industry, that's a marketing authorization holder, and the regulator. I've also been doing work on local literature surveillance, so this is a requirement. We will probably later learn that some of the sources of adverse effects of our medicines come from literature, so we're required to monitor literature to understand if maybe there will be some adverse effects that have been documented there. I do a bit of work in QMS, supporting organizations to implement the ISO 9001. A lot of the GXPs actually have component of QMS, so QMS cuts across. It doesn't matter where in the PV space or in the distributorship or you work in a community pharmacy, in a hospital, QMS is important. I really started with GDP, working with distributors to enhance their distribution, to enhance their compliance to GDP requirements. So basically, that's what I do. I have a poll that I asked David to share, if just maybe to break the ice and get the room a bit more interactive, just to understand where the audience comes from. David, do you have that poll?
Yes, it's okay right now.
All right, okay. We'll probably spend a minute.
Let me know when you can all see it on the chat. It's available on the screens, yes.
So is the poll going to appear on the screen or is now on?
It's on the screen.
All right,
I already see people are responding to it.
Okay, we'll probably, if you're ready, you can share the results and we probably see where our audience is coming from. If you're either within the ESC, East Africa, North Africa, Central, South, or West, or if you're coming from outside Africa, just to, get to understand where the audience is coming from. Thank you.
So at the moment, we have 14 responses, majority are from South Africa and East Africa.
Okay. Outside Africa?
Outside Africa, we have 3, 17%. Central Africa, none yet. West Africa as well, we still don't have anyone.
Okay, if you're ready, you can
filling the poll, guys. I see we have a total participation of 143. So maybe we can give them a minute or so, hoping we can get more people.
All right, okay.
So generally, from the view of what I'm seeing here, we have majority of people from East Africa, Kennedy, 55%. West Africa, we have 3%, Central Africa, South Africa, 21%, outside Africa, 14%. So majority are in East Africa.
All right, perfect. I think we can.
Running, yes.
Yeah, I think we can stop there and proceed. So I think probably that maybe speaks to the, where most of the members of the APN network is coming from. So this is the preview of my presentation. So this is what the team at APN asked me to speak about. I'll tweak it a bit. So I'll start with the essentials of PV. So basically to give you a fundamental or the basic principles we do in pharmacovigilance. Then the trends, this is just based on my experience of the last 5 years to see what are some of the trends in PV in the continent. And then I'll end by discussing some of the opportunities that I think are there in pharmacovigilance in the continent. So we'll start with the essentials. So this is what PV is. So this is a definition from WHO. So this is what pharmacovigilance essentially is. So what we're trying to do is detect, assess, understand, and prevent adverse effects or any other medicine or vaccine-related problem. So I just need to, so I highlighted detection, assessment, understanding, and prevention because the PV system that we set, let's say within, at the level of marketing authorization holder or within the National Pharmacovigilance Center, that is within the National Medicine Regulatory Authorities, all the process, everything we do is either on detecting, assessing, or understanding and prevention. So I also want to emphasize a bit of any other medicine or vaccine-related problem. So it's just not about adverse effects. We look at other things, let's say off-label uses, medication errors. We all look at that, or now issues of falsified medicine. So any other problem that may arise from the use of medicine. Also, we call them special conditions or special scenarios in pharmacovigilance. Let's say in special population, let's say pediatrics, pregnant mothers, let's say the elderly. So we try to also understand how the drug is being used in such populations. So PV is just not about the adverse effects, but also in other issues that may come about. And also I need to emphasize that PV happens both pre and post-marketing authorization. I think many of you may be familiar with the history of PV and why it's done. We know the limitation of clinical trials in terms one is being conducted in a very controlled environment. In a limited number of people, but after marketing authorization, these products are more widely used and in a very uncontrolled environment. So the basic principle during pre-marketing phase or during clinical trials, you're not going to be able to detect all the adverse effects of a medicine. And that's why it's important that even after marketing authorization, we still continue to detect, assess, and understand or prevent any adverse effects relating to our products. So what are the adverse effects? So these are some of the terms you may come across, or some of you may be familiar with the adverse drug reactions, adverse events following immunization, serious adverse event. Then the last one is quite a mouthful, the suspected unexpected serious adverse drug reactions. So basically what an ADR is, so an ADR is, when you give a medicine to a patient, their response is bad, but also that response is probably related to the treatment that they are being given. So any suspected, we really don't need these ADRs to be confirmed. So any suspected response to a medicine, either it can be noxious and probably it's also unintended, which a patient may experience after receiving, a medicine or a pharmaceutical product, will be considered an ADR. So there's also another term called adverse events. So adverse events may not be, related to the treatment. I usually give that example of if you're giving a patient, or maybe you're giving a patient an antihistamines to maybe control the symptoms that they're getting from a bout of cold, and then later the dizziness or the drowsiness they experience after taking those antihistamines. So a patient, you come to a community pharmacy, you give him or her antihistamines during the drowsiness, they go driving or they operate a heavy machine, then they get an accident. So that would be an adverse event. It's not really related to the cold you're trying to manage, but still there could be a linkage between maybe the accident they experience and also the product that you've given them. So adverse events for immunization, as the name really says, so you give a patient a vaccine or a kit, immunize them. So any reactions or experience that they experience afterwards will be an AFI. Then serious adverse event. So I just need to clearly state that what we consider serious in PV, let's say the patient, is fatal, the reaction is fatal, it's life-threatening, there's extended hospitalization, or the patient is hospitalized after receiving the medicine, that would be considered serious. But it's also important as a healthcare professional, you use your medical judgment to consider if an event is serious or not. So serious, the implications in terms of their reporting timelines to the health authorities. So a serious event, the requirement usually you have to report it way faster than, let's say, an event which is not serious. So we can also have serious adverse reactions. So the SOSAs are, the adverse events that is experienced during clinical trials. So during clinical trial, we call them SOSAs. After one is either can be an SCE, an AE, an ADR, or adverse events for immunization. So these are some of the terms you may be familiar with when it comes to PV. I also wanted to show you a bit of the stakeholder. This is from the reference manual pharmacovigilance from Zambia. So PV is just not about the marketing authorization holder or the regulator. There are whole lots of people or stakeholders that are involved in PV. You can either be a distributor or people in academia, the World Health Organizations, public health media. So there are so many stakeholders that are supposed or should work together to ensure that we continue monitoring the safety of the products in the market and ultimately protect public health. So try to have a wider look at, who does what in PV. So it's quite a number of stakeholders that are involved. This may vary depending on the country which you're in, but it's principally they remain the same on the different stakeholders in PV. So you cannot talk about PV in Africa without talking about the WHO Program for International Drug Monitoring. So this was established in 1968. And over time, you have seen so this, I just got this from the Uppsala Monitoring Center. So this one, as of 25th of March, you can see from this map that most of the countries on the continent are contributing to the WHO database on adverse effects. So the countries you see here, so this is Somalia, this is South Sudan, and this is Lesotho. Those are associate members. I think Somalia has just joined this year in this program. But as you can see, most of the countries on the continent are contributing to this program. I think this is Equatorial Guinea. This is called Western Sahara. Many of you may not be familiar with. So this is just, I think, only 2 or 3 countries on the continent that are not yet. So it has been a long way coming to get the African countries contribute to this program of WHO Program for International Drug Monitoring. And then, so I also wanted you to appreciate some of the methods we use in pharmacovigilance. I will not go through all of them, but just to, I think many people will be familiar with the spontaneous report. Let's say you are a community pharmacist, a patient, or you're a clinical pharmacist in the hospital, or you're a medical doctor. And then you notice or you suspect your patient has reacted to a particular product. And then you report that to let's say in Uganda or in Kenya to the Pharmacist Poison Board. So that is the spontaneous reports, which I think many people are familiar with. So the issue with passive, we call it passive surveillance more broadly. Spontaneous report, the issues under reporting, but then also, I mean, the team at the National Pharmacovigilance Center will just sit and wait. So there are issues under reporting with spontaneous reports. And then there's active surveillance. So active surveillance, in contrast to passive surveillance, we actually go to try to look and find out if patients are experiencing adverse effects related to the medicine. There are traditional epidemiological methods that can be employed in pharmacovigilance, cross-sectional study, case control studies, cohort studies, all that can be employed. I've used cross-sectional studies as part of my graduate studies to study the ADRs patients on dolutegravir are experiencing. So cross-sectional studies mostly will be used for trying to determine the burden or the prevalence of the ADR in the population. So there are many examples that we can, there are many methods we can employ in pharmacovigilance. So those are the basic essentials, just to give you a background understanding of what pharmacovigilance is, and I hope it can spark your interest a bit. So some of the the trends we have seen in PV in the continent, I will start with the digital reporting of adverse effects. I think I don't know if you're aware of, you know about the Med Safety app. So if you're a healthcare professional, you're a consumer, you can get this app, and so instead of the yellow forms or the ADR forms, especially people work in the hospital that are familiar with. So we are now trying to digitalize the way we report these cases to the national pharmacovigilance centers within the different national medicine regulatory authorities. So there's the Med Safety app, but also if you don't want to use the app, you can go to, I'm going to show you in a bit what the web-based e-reporting is. And also now we are seeing, I think within the National Pharmacovigilance Center in Uganda, we are trying to empower patients and all healthcare professionals to use the short codes, the USSD codes, to report, or you can just call the National Pharmacovigilance Center and report your adverse effects. So this is what we used to see in the past, the paper-based forms that healthcare professionals or consumers are required to fill and send that to the health authorities. But now what we are seeing, so this is a screenshot of what we call the web-based e-reporting. So why this is important, a lot of our National Pharmacovigilance Center are constrained in their human resources. So if you send a paper-based form, we are not saying we are going to refuse a paper-based form, but if you send a paper-based form to the PV center, it means that the inspector, the regulator has to manually enter this within their own database. And that manual process can make managing these reports hard. So now we're encouraging healthcare professionals and consumers to directly enter this either through the Med Safety app or the web-based e-reporting that is available within your country. This can vary within the countries in which you're in. So if you're in Nigeria, Nigeria has its own web-based e-reporting. If in Uganda, you're in Kenya, you're in Ethiopia, they have. So you need to know how to report. Of course, we can't do away all with the paper completely. So this is some of the trends. The digital reporting is important. The other trend that we are seeing is direct patient reporting. So unlike in the past where the report mostly were coming from the healthcare professionals, now we are seeing a more concerted effort within the content to empower our patients to directly report these cases to the healthcare professional or to the National Pharmacovigilance Center. So I've just highlighted a few studies here. This is a protocol. This study is ongoing in Uganda. I was briefed on the study by the PI, trying to look at peer support intervention to promote the detection, reporting, and management of adverse drug reactions in people living with HIV in Uganda. Also, there are studies or there are evidence in Ghana on trying to look at patients' contribution to adverse drug reactions. So I think that, I mean, if you should take interest in I mean, a lot of the National Pharmacovigilance Center within the continent publish, let's say, reports, newsletters, and they try to analyze the sources of their reports. So previously, I think less than 1% of the reports received were coming directly from patients. But now we're seeing more and more patients reporting directly. I know, for example, there are initiatives, let's say, within the National Pharmacovigilance Center in Uganda to empower patients. So if you go to highways, you find billboards telling patients to report these cases, or there are campaigns within, let's say, in public spaces to encourage patients to report directly these cases. So patient reporting is important. At the center of whatever we are doing, the patient is the center of it. And so we should be able to put systems that empower patients to report these cases. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, these cases need not to be confirmed. You just need to suspect and report it. The team at the National Pharmacovigilance Center, they do the causal assessment. They try to understand if this is either confirmed or not. So your role as a healthcare professional is to report, and then there will be team to assess and confirm if or if not the adverse effect is related to the product. I think earlier I mentioned the issue of spontaneous reporting that we see from healthcare professionals, the issue of quality of reports. So there are criteria we say to determine if a report is valid or not. So if you're healthcare professionals and you're reporting an adverse effect case, there are 4 things we need to look at. We need to be able to identify the patient. not necessarily the name, the initials, and not the age, the sex, all those identifiers for a patient. We need to know, of course, the exact product that you suspect is causing the reaction. We need to know the adverse reaction itself, and then also need to know reporter. So there are four things. Reporter, yeah, you, the person who is reporting, the product itself, the reaction that the patient is experiencing, also the patient itself. So that's what makes a report valid. If you miss any of those in your reports, it's considered invalid. But either the marketing authorization holders or the National Pharmacovigilance Center will try to reach out to you to get more information. So these reports are just not limited to the National Pharmacovigilance Center. You can also report directly to the marketing authorization holder of the product in the market. So direct patient reporting has also been a trend. And also there are initiatives, for example, within South Africa to look beyond products or pharmaceutical products or medicinal products. So we are looking at medical device vigilance. And I think this is a trend that's going to continue within the continent to actually require companies that put medical devices in the market to monitor their safety and report them to the health authorities. So not just from medical devices, but also even within the herbal product space, we are trying to get to monitor safety of herbal products within the continent. There Hemovigilance, that's monitoring the safety of blood products. All those are some of the trends that is happening in the continent: medical devices, herbal products, and hemovigilance. So if your country where you are has guidelines, you need to refer to those guidelines to really understand exactly what you're supposed to do in reporting safety-related issues, whether it's like the blood products, the herbal products, or medical devices. Then also what we are seeing on the continent, more and more countries developing their own pharmacovigilance guidelines. So this is from Somalia. So Somalia approved this document in November of last year. I think they published it sometime later this year. I mean, January this year. That's when this pharmacovigilance guidelines from Somalia was published. But also what I want to emphasize here, these guidelines are important. I think I've written, I've put my opinion in the past. So within the continent, I speak mostly from the side of the marketing authorization holders. So when we try to set our own pharmacovigilance system within the continent, you find lots of challenges in terms of trying to understand what the regulator expects. And so in that space where there is no guideline, it can really be challenging to set up, system locally and maybe meet, the specific requirements. So it's important that I hope the regulators on the continent who are attending this webinar. So it's important to have these guidelines in place to empower. I mentioned earlier during the start of my presentation, the stakeholders in PV. So typically, a lot of these guidelines will have responsibilities for the different stakeholders within the PV, the PV network. So without these guidelines, it can really be challenging. And you find maybe people are doing, or I think from what we see from marketing authorization holders, I mean, it's hard for us to, let's say, go to NIH and tell them you need to put a PV system in this country when the country doesn't have, let's say, even a guideline or a regulator requiring that. So when we have these guidelines in place, it can help us, to speak to the marketing authorization holders to establish systems. Otherwise, without it, some of them will see no justification in putting this system together. But also, when you're putting your PV system, let's say at the local level, you're not really doing it for the regulator, but you're doing it to protect to monitor safety of your product in the market, but also most importantly, to promote safety of the patient. So without these national guidelines, we expect marketing authorization holders to have systems in place to monitor the safety of their product. So I think even progressively, we're going to see more countries. I think later I'm going to show you a study from South Africa that shows that with studies from Southern Africa, that shows that a number of countries just didn't have PV guidelines. But looking to the future, I strongly believe we are going to see more and more countries developing these guidelines. So harmonization of regulations, a good case study is what has happened in the EAC. I think I'm going to publish a newsletter tomorrow trying to assess the impact and the challenges countries have faced in harmonization of PV regulation. I think yesterday the APN network had a very interesting webinar on the global health priorities in regulatory strengthening within the continent. But usually when we see people talk about harmonization of regulation of the continent, it's more about really product assessment. I find, which hurts me, that PV usually, it's not really considered during harmonization. So the priority most times is on how fast can we reduce the timelines for registration of products in the market. So a lot of the harmonization initiative, let's say in Zanzibar, I think in Southern Africa, or ECOWAS, or even the bilateral agreement we see between different health authorities in the continent, mostly focus on assessment. We don't see much of PV. So this is a good case study of the harmonization that has taken place within the EAC. Of course, with harmonizations, it can look very good on paper, but when it comes to the implementations, for example, for this guideline, you have seen a number of challenges. Countries were required to domesticate this guideline. But I think in the EAC, I think only Rwanda and Kenya have done it. Other countries like Tanzania, South Sudan, and Uganda, they haven't done it. Of course, the maturity levels of the regulators vary considerably across the continent. So I think some of the trend we are going to see, hopefully we can see Southern Africa in the SADC region harmonizing PV, or ECOWAS in Western Africa also doing this. So we're going to see more and more harmonizations in the continent of regulation. So maybe briefly about the opportunities I see. Of course, I mentioned earlier on a number of countries don't have PV regulation in place. And so I see, well, we can look at it as a challenge, but I think it's an opportunity where there's a gap that provides an opportunity to fill it. So this study was done in 2021 to look at the PV guidelines within SADC, that's Southern African Development Community. This was a very interesting study that I love because it clearly shows, I think, out of the only half of the country in the SADC region had PV guidelines in place. And so it just shows the gap that is there, just from the national level, before even you go to harmonization itself within the PV, within the national PV systems, you find regulations are lacking or guidelines are not clear. And so yes, this presents an opportunity for countries to develop PV regulation. So it's important to develop harmonize. It's very, David works in the regulatory affairs space, and if you're trying to register a product in a country and different countries have their own requirements, that can be very challenging. So for us from the industry, we are a big advocate for harmonization. So if even when you're developing your national guidelines, it's important to harmonize regionally or at the continental level. That makes our lives from the industry much easier. So we advocate for harmonization. It's important to strengthen these guidelines. So some guidelines, through my work in regulatory intelligence, I set a lot of guidelines from the continent, and then you find maybe you want to understand this requirement is in one country, then the other country doesn't have the requirement, and so therefore it's important to actually strengthen these guidelines, make them clear. Don't leave us to assume what you need, and maybe if you don't do it right, maybe you're not happy about it when in the first place there was no clear guideline in place. Implementation is important. We don't just stop at developing these guidelines. I think we are all guilty of having things on paper when we don't actually practice it. Then that becomes a problem. I know, for example, in Uganda, there was a circular that released a few years ago requiring, it was a very, very interesting circular from the authority in Uganda. They were saying for you to have your product in the market, you have a PV system in place. So meaning without any PV system in place, even the product shouldn't be available. But I think 4 years later, I think the authority has found challenge in enforcing that. Of course, you have to strike a balance, access to the product. But if we have very, strong health authorities or national medicine regulatory authorities in the continent. We'll see marketing authorization holders actually complying, okay? So if the dog is just barking and is not biting, I mean, we see a lot of reluctancy from marketing authorization holders to put PV system in the continent. I think yesterday, I think David from Bill and Melinda Gates was speaking about, clinical trials within the continent. So, I mean, I will later speak to African medicine agencies. If we harmonize, we integrate, have a bigger bargaining power, saying you don't have a PV system in the continent, will not register your product in the country. Engagement is very important. We have seen, from the industry side, you just wake up one day, there's a new guideline in PV from Kenya, and you never saw it coming. There was no draft guideline, and it becomes very hard. Or sometimes we try to reach out to the health authorities to inquire or ask. I mean, sometimes getting even a working email is hard, or getting up-to-date information on the website is challenging, or just getting responses from health authorities in the continent is very challenging. So engagement is important. I want to speak a bit about the people in pharmacovigilance. We'll try to, spark interest. Hopefully, this presentation, can spark your interest in PV and look at this as a career. I think of it as a pretty virgin area in the continent. I think I've been involved in projects trying to look for key PVs across the continent. To find people who are interested is hard. But so the interest is important. We talk about training is important. I think David later will speak about the initiative within the APN in PV training. For people in the North Africa, they should take interest what the Rabat Collaboration Center is doing. Is in Morocco. They have a lot of interesting initiatives to train folks in PV. Of course, the importance of mentorship. We have really senior colleagues or senior people in the continent to be able to mentor, because we know they're not going to be there all the time. At some point, they're going to leave the stage. Then we need people that have been mentored to take up the space. Of course, learning in PV never stops. We have guidelines that keep changing, and then it's important to keep your knowledge up to date. So I want to encourage really people, if you're looking for a new career, if you're just, it's a young pharmacist, or you've done something in rec affairs or medical representative, and you're looking for something new, I think PV, it's an interesting field to take interest in. I know there are graduate programs, let's say at University of Nairobi, for people interested in PV, if you want to get a master's level. But for me, the most important thing, if I'm looking for PV within the continent for a certain project, I think the interest comes first. We can train you on job, and then you learn on what to do. So the people in PV is important. We have had discussion within the PV space of, I'm going to speak a bit of AI later, of, the work is too much. We don't have people, just put artificial intelligence to do the work. AI in pharmacovigilance, just like in, this is, I think, a thing now within, not just PV is not excluded to artificial intelligence and what's happening. And so these are some of the case studies. I just wanted to show you that AI is being employed in PV. I've seen a lot of cases from different companies on how they employed machine learning to identify adverse events from literature. So this is happening. And of course, for us, maybe we'll do local data surveillance. In a few years, we may not have what to do because we have AI doing some of this work. So we need to, keep abreast and know what AI can do, or how it can maybe make our work better. We have seen current thinkings or guidelines or thinkings from, let's say, the European Medicines Agency or the FDA, on their current thinking on use of AI, let's say in pharmaceutical manufacturing. But what you haven't seen is regulators from Africa provide us what really they're thinking, or what the guidance or the direction the industry should take in using artificial intelligence in their processes. I have a video here just briefly about the AMI. AMA. David, just confirm if you guys can hear this.
Okay. You can't hear this now?
You can hear it?
No, I can't.
I don't know why, but I just wanted to.
Maybe you can
to
stop
show-
and reshare with the sound audio again.
So I stop sharing. Okay,
Yes,
let me
stop
just
sharing and
stop
reshare.
all right, perfect. Let me do that.
As it does that, please share your questions on the Q&A and the chat as well. I'm already taking some of the questions that have come.
David, just confirm if you can hear it again and we see.
I can't hear it, Kennedy.
Can you hear it?
No.
Okay, we'll just probably skip it. I think Juliet will later share the link, to the webinar attendees. So this is African Medicines Agency. I think yesterday the presenter from Bill and Melinda Gates spoke a bit about it. So I just wanted to, to talk a bit about some of the initiative in PV that's expected from the African Medicine Agency, or some of the initiatives that actually is happening already. We are not waiting for the AMA to, to start operation, but the AYUDA NEPAD program on, the harmonization initiative within the continent has some programs PV specific. As I mentioned earlier on, harmonization usually just trying to get products in the market much faster, PV usually in the backseat. But we are trying to see PV more, on the front. We are trying to advocate for that. So there are basically three: the AU3 smart surveillance system. So this was a pilot program, I think, involved 5 countries. That was supposed to provide an end-to-end safety surveillance for COVID-19 vaccine. So this was something that was initiated, but I think this year the AU3S is expanding from 5, I think, to 12 countries within the continent to support really the regulators on safety surveillance, but also what AMA is doing, and I think was emphasized yesterday, is they're really priority health products within the continent. It's not going to be, trying to look at each and every product. So the same thing with the AU3S. It was for COVID-19 vaccines before, but it's expected to expand the scope of the product to HIV, TB, malaria, polio, Ebola vaccines, all that. So that's what the AU3S is supposed to be doing. Pharmacovigilance, that's the safety database. So this probably will come much later, not this year. So this is the proposed database, the proposed safety database for the continent. So the idea is different health authorities in the continent will, directly send the reports, the adverse reports to this database. This is important for ownership of our data, but also, the unique, ethnogenetic of the continent. So this is unique, database for all the safety concerns from the continent. So the African Union Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, again, this is supposed to help in signal validation or invalidation. So signals are basically the information you get, from different sources that possibly points to, to a causal relationship between your adverse effect and the product. So what happens is these signals are supposed to be validated or managed to ensure or to confirm whether, this adverse effects actually from this product or not. So again, this is going to be established at the continental level to help in trying to validate or invalidate the signals, but also the ultimate decision making is proposed to be done by the national medicine regulatory authorities. Yes, I want to invite all of you to Kampala this year. For people interested in PV, I really encourage you to join ISOP. ISOP is International Site of Pharmacovigilance, and I've listed a number of benefits. That the membership fee is not really expensive, so I think we should be able to afford it. But most importantly, we are trying to push the ISOP African chapter to bring together like-minded individuals interested in PV. And so in Uganda, we are proud to host the chapter meeting this year, sometime in July this year. And if you have abstracts within this area, please attend. The website is here, isopafrica.com. Please contact us, and we hope you'll join us later this year. in Kampala, Uganda. So please go to ISOP website, look at the benefits. You have any questions, feel free to ask. And hopefully you'll join. And of course, the network is important. If you're looking for a career in PV, joining such a network will be instrumental, in not just growing, but also getting opportunities. I'm almost done. So basically, in summary, I discussed the essentials of PV. I gave you the definition. I talk about the different adverse effects that are in PV. I talk about the different stakeholders. Some of the trends that I mentioned, PV, the issue of harmonizations, direct patient reporting, digital reporting, harmonization, national PV guidelines that are being developed, opportunities, a couple that I mentioned in terms of, well, the regulations that we expect from the different continents, and also the people in PV. Without PV, we need people to do the work. So hopefully, I've sparked your interest in PV. But also, let's be, let's keep abreast of what is being done with the African Medicines Agency and some of the PV initiative that is being done. And then, so really, I think this is just to sort of spark your interest in PV and hopefully be a champion of pharmacovigilance where you work. I think I'm done, David. I think I'm done.
Thank you so much, Kennedy. We have a poll. Maybe we'll just launch it now. So the poll is coming up.
Yes.
Let's engage and share our feedback on that. Yes.
Do I stop sharing my screen? I think the poll is about challenges. Should I stop sharing my screen?
You don't have to. You can leave it there for people to just connect, but the poll is already up. Guys, please share your feedback. Let's just capture them and see what are the challenges that you're seeing in the pharmacovigilance space, and anything that maybe pharmacovigilance challenge that you faced in your line of work, so that we can also gain insights on how better to work and what are the priorities that people need to work on.
Yes, I think, David, as people respond to that question, maybe I read that question in the chat that I should be responding to. I'm conscious about time. And so yes. I think we use the next 10 minutes to respond to those questions. Questions that remain unanswered, I think I'll work with Juliet to provide a written response to those questions. So yes, we can go forward with the questions.
Awesome. So thank you so much. So maybe the first question that I saw on the chat here that I will start you off with, Kennedy, was with regards to how can you compare the Somali pharmacovigilance guidelines with the good pharmacovigilance guidelines in Europe or the US? So the comparison between what we have in Somalia and the developed markets, yes.
Of course, I've looked at the PV guideline in Somalia. I think the EMA, we call them GVP modules within the European Medicines Agency, is very broad and has been used as a benchmark for different countries present to develop their own PV guidelines. So the PV guideline in Somalia is limited, but at least it's something. It's limited in terms of providing clear guidance to the different stakeholders on what to do. But I think it's a step in the right direction. The guidelines can always be improved with the stakeholders. So the Somalia National Guideline is good. It gives some guidance to the industry, but it's not as broad or extensive, or let's say as strict as what is from EMA. Thank you.
Okay, you actually came to me at the point when you're talking about. Hello, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yes. So there's a question that came around the point when you were talking about reporting and all the investigation, especially feedback that is coming from patients. The question is, are there mechanisms in place to scan for, investigate, and resolve adverse events on social media platforms? And the background on that is that lately patients discuss their care experience or any adverse event experience, a lot of it on social media platforms. Are there anything that is happening in that space that you could share?
Yes. So there are clear requirements from national medicine regulatory authorities requiring marketing authorization holders to monitor social media to pick any adverse effects that patients are reporting. Yes, so there are systems in place from within at the level of marketing authorization holders to pick up those information. But also there are discussions. Of course, it's a lot of data to process and also pick. I think there are discussions. Can we, develop some AI tool to help us pick those information? So yes, that's being actively monitored by marketing authorization holders, and it's a mandatory requirement to have system in place to pick those key issues that comes from social media. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kennedy. Then the following question I see from Ibrahim. Thank you, Kennedy, for the insightful and well-articulated presentation. Could you please comment on the role of independent consultants in pharmacovigilance and what strategies are in place to engage their services in advancing pharmacovigilance practice in African continent? And the other one is more to us. How can Nigeria be more active in APN? So maybe you'll share on the first one, I'll respond to the other.
Yeah, so I think in my last slide, I have a newsletter, a monthly newsletter that people could check and see, if what I write interests them. I think in January I wrote something along that line of the first question. So what we have seen, so what happens at the marketing authorization holder level is a lot of the PV functions outsourced. So it's not in-house. So what will happen is you get a company X to process your cases, develop, we call them risk management plan, maintain your pharmacovigilance system master files. So I'll oral, do the QPP presentation. So yes, of course, outsourcing means you get the expertise. So the consultants are the experts, and most importantly, the local experts. Let's say you are an NH based in Germany, and so you need to engage someone locally to present, and that's where the consultant comes in. So the consultants provide the expertise and also the local knowledge in supporting marketing authorization holders to comply to local PV requirements. I think I've also done work as a consultant to develop training materials. We did some work with the East African Pharmacovigilance Initiative to develop training content for healthcare professionals in Kenya. So yes, trainings, providing that expertise. So the opportunity is there, and I think consultants have a role to play as a stakeholder. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kennedy. And Ibrahim, maybe just to add to that, for gaining and being part of actively engaging in APN, we actually have a supporting us with engagement in Nigeria. But at the same time, by virtue that you're already here, that's an opportunity we can connect and see how do we make APN more present and more active in Nigeria. That is an opportunity for us. Then does TV also entail documentation or depends with the country?
David, you're breaking. I don't know if it's just. I mean, you're breaking. I cannot hear you well.
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah. I can now. So you can you please repeat the question?
The question is, does PV also entail documentation or it depends with the country?
Does it entail documentation?
Yes.
Yes, documentation is very important in PV or really within any quality management system or role. So yes, documentation is done. So there are international, I mean, for people interested in PV, could take interest in work which is done by, ICH or CIOMS. All those organizations have, let's say, model forms or ADR reporting forms that have been adopted by regulators. So yes, documentation is very important in PV or really in any space that I think. So yes, there's documentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kennedy. And then just a follow-up comment I see here from Richard. Independent consultants, these are not being allowed in some countries to provide QPPV services on behalf of the marketing authorization holders. I think that is now country context specific, but it's important that we see where the opportunities are, how do we drive to have that here. Over to you, Kennedy.
Maybe briefly on that. I know Ethiopia. So Ethiopia I think Ethiopia and South Africa. So for Ethiopia, for example, the QPV role cannot be outsourced. So if you're a QPV for marketing solution holder in Ethiopia, you have to be directly employed by the MA. So it's not outsourced, so you cannot get a consultant to do that work. Whereas in Rwanda, Tanzania, you can outsource, you can delegate. So it's country specific. I think only, from the guidelines I've looked at South Africa, Ethiopia, but I think when Kenya, a lot of the countries outsource, and I think that has been the model from EMA, European Medicines Agency, that allow for outsourcing. Yeah, so, but most would allow outsourcing, but some countries have, unique requirements. Yeah, so I agree with the comment. David?
Exactly, from industry perspective, yes, opportunity for industry stakeholders and engagement to see, can we look at harmonizing even the practice of pharmacovigilance so that people in different countries services as consultants, rather than having to have those internal company requirements. It is an opportunity, but other than that, it's almost actually top of the hour. I'll give you a minute to just give your final remarks, Kennedy, as we come to the end of it.
So I think really my goal is to spark interest in PV from the attendees and hopefully become champions of pharmacovigilance within our areas of work, and hopefully also interest people in joining us in the PV space. Otherwise, thank you everyone for your active participation. Thank you, David, for joining. Juliet, the program assistant at APN, has done a tremendous job in getting me to present and coordinating and ensure that everything has happened well. So thank you. I'll hand back to you, and I can stop sharing my video and people stop looking at me. Yes, David.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kennedy. It's been a pleasure listening to you, learning from you, and we've really learned a lot. For me, actually, I got a little bit threatened at one point that you're taking my regulatory affairs people to the pharmacovigilance line of work, but I'm hoping they'll stay committed and passionate about regulatory affairs as I am, and in getting medicines available to the African people as we keep on that journey. But as we come to the end of it, this is the opportunity that I also tell you the kind of work we are doing. And in line of our work, we already mentioned pharmaceutical workforce development. And on that note, then we have some of our courses, the currently established actually operational running ones. We have a regulatory affairs training, which is ongoing. We are starting the next cohort, which will be starting in May. And our programs are accredited by the Pharmacy and Poisons Board that has continuous professional development programs. We're also accredited by the International Pharmaceutical Federation, FIP. So we encourage you, for those who are interested, my colleague Juliet has been sharing actually some links on the chat. Please engage. Let's see how we can support you in your journey, because getting the knowledge is important in unlocking what possibilities are there. How can you get it to practice, and what does that journey look like? Having content professionals, getting meaningful engagement, but most importantly, serving the continent in our different spaces of work. With that, I'll come to the end of it and urge you to engage with us as well in our social media channels. For those who are sharing emails, don't worry about it. By the virtue that you and registered, we have access to your email address, and we'll share the presentation, the recording, and any other material that we might find available that will be relevant to this. So thank you and have a good
day. David, I think
yes,
there's
Kennedy.
a feedback form. There's a feedback form, so we'll really value your feedback. I think Julia is going to send that to the webinar attendees. So please give us feedback on what we can improve and do better for these webinars from APN.
Kennedy?
Thank you. I was talking about the feedback form to encourage participants to fill the feedback form.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. So there's a feedback form, guys. Please let's share our feedback. Juliet, maybe you could just help me reshare it again so that we can also see areas of improvement and what kind of content we need to bring up to you. And thank you for the reminder, Kennedy.